First one, to live prayer. Now note that I said we have to live prayer. I didn't say we have to just say a prayer here or there. I didn't say we have to, just have a prayer meeting once a month or maybe even once a week. And I didn't say we have to fast and stuff. I mean, those things are good. But what I'm saying is we have to live prayer. When Paul says devote yourselves to prayer, that word devote in the original language means more than just saying the prayer here and there. The word devote, I looked at the Greek and I picked it apart, and this is what it means. The word devote, when he says devote yourselves to prayer, means to be steadfastly attentive in prayer, to give unremitting care in prayer, to continue all the time in prayer, to preserve and not faint in prayer, to be in constant readiness in prayer, to wait on God constantly. If we're going to be praying constantly, what does that tell you? It tells me I got to live prayer. Paul says even in Thessalonians, he says, pray without ceasing. Isn't that what he says? And so we're supposed to live out this prayer. See, when I hear the word prayer, I often think of it, what is prayer? Paul is saying, no. It's more than that. It's you living a life of prayer. From the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, your entire waking hours is one big, massive, walking, breathing prayer of constant communication, being tuned into God. We are to live prayer. We can't pull that off without prayer, man. Someone's right. We need God to do this. We need to be living, connected to God constantly. Living a life of prayer. Simone Weil, the radical Christian anarchist, once said this about prayer. She said, prayer is living our lives in absolute attention to God. Isn't that good? Prayer is not just words, it's living our lives in absolute attention to God. That's why Paul says, devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful, present tense. When you're devoting yourselves to prayer, you're constantly being watchful all the time. You are on. You are on the on button 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Wasn't Ethan in the Mission Impossible movies? Isn't that the way he was? He was always on, right? He's always looking around his shoulder. He's always alert. He's always tuned in. We need to be like him. If we're to fulfill this mission, we need to be tuned on. We need to live prayer. Now let me explain to you something. I didn't understand this truth until back in 2004. I'll get into that in a minute. But I used to think prayer, you know what I was? I was a spiritual terrorist to God. You know what I'm talking about? I was a spiritual terrorist. I'd go to Jesus, I'd go, all right, Jesus, here's my list of non-negotiables. You need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do this. Spiritual terrorist. I'm sure Jesus would be saying, oh no, here he comes again. The guy's always got a list. He's always got these demands. I just wish I could walk with him during the day. I just wish I could hang out with McCartney, but here he comes again with a list. Not much of a relationship, is it? But how many of us have that kind of prayer life? Your list. We just talk to God. We tell God what to do. Or we tell God what to do. We say to God, God, my grandmother, she's got hip replacement surgery. And we tell God like as if he doesn't know it already. Could you picture God up in heaven going, what? Your grandmother's sick? I didn't know that. What hospital is she in? What floor? What room number? He already knows what we need before we even ask him, is what the scriptures say. But I always used to come up with these lists. I was like this friend of mine, when he was 10 years old, he told me a story. He was going up the stairs, and on the way up the stairs, he looked down at his sister and his mother and father there in the living room. He was heading up the stairs, and he stopped in the middle of the stairway, and he said, Mom, Dad, I'm going to bed. I'm going to pray. Does anybody want anything? If that's the extent of our prayer life, we're not going to pull this thing off. We're not going to have a mission accomplished. But that's the way I prayed for years and years and years until 2004, when I had the worst year of my life. I had a young man murdered in our ministry. I had a little boy who I knew died and drowned. And I was done. I was burnt out. And I had to get away. I had to go on a sabbatical. And on my sabbatical, to get my head screwed on, I was in Hawaii on my way to Australia. And to stop over, I went for a swim. And I caught a wave. And the wave lifted me up and pile drove me head first. I hit my head in the bottom of the ocean, and I was paralyzed. I had to get airbagged and rescued and 6 months of rehab and to learn how to walk again and all that kind of nonsense. And that's when I learned that prayer is a lifestyle. Let me show you how I learned it. About 4 weeks in the hospital, and it's really weird because the physiotherapist was strapped a belt around him and me, and he kind of dragged me around with this belt, and I'm like going everywhere he's going. That's how he taught me how to walk a little bit, till I was strong enough to walk on a walker. And then the hospital said, okay, we're going to move you to a seniors residence. I got to live with a bunch of seniors. And it was cool because they got these wide alleyways, or I should call them alleyways, hallways, in the seniors residence, Rosalie Hall, these wide things, and I had room for my walker, right? And I remember walking to downstairs, to the elevator to get breakfast, and I'm on my walker, and there's this old lady beside me, and I'm looking at her, and she's looking at me, and she's like, "You want a drag race? Bring it on, lady. Here we go, we're flying down the hallway." That's how bad I went this fast. Woo! I couldn't run, I couldn't be busy, I couldn't do stuff, I couldn't go on the internet, I couldn't watch TV. This is my life, I walked this fast. And all of a sudden I began to talk a lot to God. And all of a sudden God began to talk a lot to me. Because I slowed down. And I remember one morning, I'm in my walker and I'm going down the hallway, and I said to myself out loud, I wonder what I'm going to do today. And I felt the Father laugh at me. You know God laughed at you? It's a nice laugh. It was a friendly laugh. And I felt him laugh, and I'm walking, and I felt him laugh at me. And then I realized, I said, "You're right, God. What am I going to do today? Look at me. I can't even walk fast. I can't even drive. What am I going to do today?" I said, "Sorry, Father. What are we going to do together today?" That's what Paul's talking about. Devote yourself to prayer, being watchful and thankful. You're connected to God. That's how I pray. Every morning I wake up and I say, "Lord, what are we going to do together today?" When in the morning wakes up, it's kind of like this water bottle. This is me. Here I am. It's his water bottle. It's full of water, right? When I wake up in the morning, I'm kind of full of Colin. That water's Colin. And God can't fill me up with his water, his truth, his life. So what do I have to do? I have to empty myself off of Colin. Oh, now I can fill it up a little bit. Wait a second. Now I can fill it up this more. Hold on. Now I can fill up half the bottle. Where's the nearest washroom, by the way? But the point I'm trying to make is in the morning when I wake up, I make that prayer, God, what are we going to do together today? But as I pray that prayer, what I have to do is I have to empty myself of Colin. I got to empty myself of me. Because God can't fill me up with him unless I get rid of me. You understand? This bottle of water can't be filled up with fresh water unless it gets rid of the stale water. An empty bottle can only be filled up when it's empty. And so I start my morning off and I say, "Lord, fill me. Get rid of me and fill me with you. What are we going to do together today, Lord? It's not my agenda. Out goes Colin's agenda. Give me your agenda, Lord. What are we going to do together today, Lord? It's not about my pride. It's not about my ego. Get rid of it. Out with my ego and pride. Fill me up with you, Lord. Your agenda, your glory, your praise." What a great way to start your day, right? And here's the cool thing. You start your day like that, and then you continue to devote yourselves to prayer. You continue for the rest of the day. You're always in tune with the Spirit to see what he's doing, to see where he's at work. Do you know the word Yahweh? Bible scholars tell us that when the Hebrews tried to come up with a name for God, Yahweh was the name, right? But the word Yahweh kind of means breath. And they think what they did was they realized that your breath sounds like Yahweh. You ever figured that out? Listen. Especially when you're jogging. Think about that for a second. Isn't that cool? When you breathe. And the thought there was, in Genesis when it said that God breathed life into Adam, the thought here is this, is that the first minute you're born, your first breath you breathe in God. Isn't that cool? Little baby. And the last breath on earth when you die, you still breathe in God. And at night when you're sleeping in your bed, you're breathing in God. The point being is that we're never away from God. He's always with us. He's always there. And so during the day, not only do I start my morning in His presence, but during the day I recognize that He's with me. He's with me everywhere I go. His presence is there, and I keep my eyes and my ears attuned to what He's doing. That's what it means to devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. And then at the end of the day, I do a thing that the Catholics taught me, and it's this. It's called the prayer of examine. I lay in my bed before I go to sleep, and I examine the day that had happened before, the hours before, and I see where God was moving in my life. And I see His grace, and I see His forgiveness, and I see His love, and I see how I was able to join Him in some of His works. And you know what? I devote myself in prayer, always being watchful, and you know what happens to me? I become thankful. I end off my night being so thankful to God for the beautiful day He's given me. And I'm able to have a great sleep. And then when I wake up in the morning, I go, Lord, what are we going to do together again this morning? That's what Paul's talking about. It's not just throwing a prayer. It's not just a list. It's living prayer. And you know what happens when you live your life that way? Devoting yourself to prayer. When you do that, guess what happens? You begin to see things with the eyes of Jesus. You begin to say things with the words of Christ. You begin to think with the mind of Christ. When you touch people, it's Jesus touching them through you. And the cool thing is, people will come up to you, non-Christian people, and they'll say, there's something different about you. You seem to always have a bit of joy. There's a peace about you. There's a wisdom about you. Why are you that way? I've had people say that to me. It's not because of me. It's because I'm devoting myself to prayer. So here's the first thing I need to challenge you with. Will you live a life of prayer? Do you accept that task? Do you? Yes, well, yeah, we're all for this one, yay! But then when we start getting to the nitty-gritty, it gets a little tougher, doesn't it? You mean, I got to devote myself to prayer 24/7? Yeah, you do. But I can't think of anything more wonderful than to walk with Jesus all the time. Because He's already there with us. We're just finally recognizing, like the brother Chris said, there at the bench in the middle of Slum Row. Skid Row, there He is. He's right there. You begin to see Jesus. He's with you. You'll experience Him. We need to devote ourselves to prayer. Always being watchful. Always being thankful. But the second thing I shared with you is not only are we to live prayer, but we are to live Christ. Paul says we are to proclaim the mystery of Christ. Now that's a weird one, isn't it? Don't you think that's weird? Proclaim the mystery of Christ? Paul, why didn't you just say proclaim Christ? Why are you saying the mystery of Christ? What do you mean by this mystery of Christ? Well, I don't know if Rabbi talked about this or Bruxy talked about it, but if you go back to Colossians chapter 1, and if you look at verse 27, he talks about the mystery of Christ that we're to proclaim. Colossians 1, verse 27 says, to them God has chosen to make known among, now get this word, the Gentiles, it's most of us here who aren't Jewish, we're Gentiles. God has chosen to make known among the Gentiles the glorious riches of this mystery, which is what? Christ in you, the hope of glory. And then he says, we proclaim Him, Christ, admonishing and teaching everyone with all wisdom, so that we may present everyone perfect in Christ. Here's the deal. When Paul talks about the mystery of Christ, what he's saying is that there were people in the church there with the Colossians when they gathered in the city of Colossae. They were gathering there, this church, and there were false teachers. And these false teachers said this. They said, look, Jesus isn't enough. He's just part of the picture. You need more than Jesus. You also need to get circumcised. Ouch, man, that's not fun. You also need to eat certain foods. You also need to have certain rituals. You also need to keep certain laws. You had to have all this religious stuff and Jesus if you're to live a life that is pleasing to God and if you're to have a life of eternity with God. That's what the false teachers were saying. And Paul comes along. It's so cool. He comes along and says, hey, these Gentiles, you don't accept them into Judaism. You don't accept them into this stuff. Paul says, but you know what? They don't need that stuff. You know what? All they need is what? Jesus. And that's the mystery to those Judaizers. It's the mystery today to all those religious people, even in the evangelical circles. They don't get it. You start talking about Jesus and they get scared. They start saying, well, you know what, I don't know. I mean, Jesus' red letters, those words of Jesus, I mean, that's kind of radical stuff. And all of a sudden you get hit by a wall of religion. Boom! Paul comes along, he just wipes the clean. He wipes the table clear. He wipes it clear of religion. He gets rid of all the religious crap. And he replaces it with Jesus. Amen? That's all we need is Christ. It's all about Jesus. That's the mystery. That's what we have to do. We have to live Christ. The world is starving for that, my friends. The world is starving for that. I mean, Paul ended up in jail because of it. All the religious people couldn't deal with it. Even the Gentile religions, they had all these gods, and maybe they'd accept Jesus as just one of them. And Paul just says, get out! Get all that religious crap out off the table. If you got Jesus, you got it all. That's what the world has to hear.